monster next door. Have you ever known someone who has supposedly or evidentially done bad things, and when you heard about it you thought, wow, I never expected that? Over the course of our lives we are likely to shake hands with at least one person that has murdered someone, statistically spoken at least. So with it in mind, we might have been just the luckiest person on earth to escape a murderer on this one fateful day. This is my own story from back when I was in the military. The realization of what happened fucked me up so much that I was on my way to becoming an alcoholic. Luckily, I was able to get my act together just in the nick of time. I got back on track, but this story still left its mark. I served as NBC defense sergeant in a town called Hochster. It lies directly at the River Weser in pretty much the exact middle of Germany. It's surrounded by hills and lush forests, and judging from the nature around, I was happy to call it my home for 8 years. Over time I learned that when it came to sports you could split the preferences of my platoon in 3 groups. There were the team players who played basically any team-based or competitive sport all the time, mostly football or soccer, depending where you are from, basketball and volleyball. Then there were the bodybuilders who took every chance they got to go pump iron, and last but not least there were the cardiacs. Basically everyone who did not fall in one of the other categories. They were mostly out for runs or military fitness crossruns with full gear and such. I didn't like playing football or soccer, and the gym was so small that not even a full squad could fit in there at the same time. So naturally I went with the cardiacs. After I went with the usual suggested routes provided by my comrades, I started developing my own tracks based on how fit and well I felt at any given day. The tracks ranged from easy and short over even ground to runs over sometimes several hills spanning a length of up 17 kilometers or 10 miles in total. So basically there was a track for every mood for me. One day in, I think it was June, I was on one of my longer runs. I spared myself the hills but still had about 14 kilometers or 87 miles to go. My path took me from my barracks, through the town into the next adjacent village called Bosseborn and back again. There I came across a man leaving his house as I was running past. Naturally we greeted each other, and when I came back the same way he was still outside and took the opportunity to strike up a conversation. He asked me if I was actually coming from the barracks, to which I replied positively. He then went on talking about how this must already been quite a run since the barracks were about 5 miles away from his house. He noticed my dialect and determined I was not from around the area, so he proceeded to suggest me some places to visit and some trails for my next runs. We ended up chatting for a couple of minutes before I continued on my way. However, over the years, I took this track a couple of times more, and some few times the guy was outside again, and we would always chat a bit about how the week was going and other basic nonsense. I learned that his name was Willie and he was married. He seemed to be a pretty chill guy, a bit, I don't want to say slow, but he definitely came off as kind of mentally challenged. But he was straightforward and even pretty sympathetic. His house wasn't quite my taste, it seemed a bit run down, but that came as no surprise given that I perceived him to be a bit slow, and in the end, he did have his own house after all. As time went by and I came closer to my regular discharge from the army, I decided to take my runs down the route past Willie's home in hopes of getting a chance to say goodbye. However, I never saw him again outside, and for me to just knock on his door to give my farewells was just kind of absurd. I mean, we didn't know each other really, we just talked on different occasions for some minutes and exchanged names. Definitely not enough for me just making a fuss out of my discharge like that, and so, I left the army in the town of Hochster to study social science at the Humboldt University in Berlin, starting in October of 2015. After my first semester, I first heard some people talking about Hochster. I didn't think much of it until my old home's name fell more often. At first I thought I was just becoming paranoid from nostalgia. I actually had a lot of trouble adapting to a life as a civilian again, let alone a university student. When I visited my family, however, my mother asked me if I heard what happened, and of course she too was talking about my old home. I do not watch TV, listen to the radio, or read newspapers, so when it comes to news I am basically never really up to date ever. My mother told me that there was a big criminal case near my barracks with multiple people dead. When they showed me pictures of where it all happened, I recognized it immediately as Willie's house. My very first reaction was me feeling sick to the stomach. My eyes widened and my mother immediately knew that I recognized the place. I believed Willie and his wife got killed, and I was flabbergasted and plain shocked how someone could kill them. I was asking myself how depraved a person must be to basically kill this simple but nice man and his wife. I grabbed the newspaper in disbelief and started to read, and with every word my shock went deeper and deeper. But for another reason, Willie was not dead. He and his wife were actual murderers. At least 2 women were tortured over weeks and months until they died by him and his wife. More women were supposedly able to flee or got released. No one went to the police out of sheer fear for their lives, which was very much given, it seems. Willie and his wife were complete psychopaths. Willie was kind of the commander, and his wife just obeyed out of fear, because she would have been his victim if it was not for the other women, but still she did a lot too. Together they lured women to their home just to torture and eventually kill them. The only thing that they were looking for in their victims was that they had to have only few, or better, even no friends or family, so nobody would miss them or even search for them. Willie had these women write suicide notes before killing them and sent them to their friends and family, because the overall goal was to torture the women so much that in the end they actually really tried to commit suicide. He wanted them to consider death a release they would wish for. This guy was, I have seen and heard a lot of horrible stuff before already, but the things he did to his victims were on another level. He disposed of one body in the oven, and when bone fragments and teeth did not burn to ashes, he smashed it with a hammer to leave no identifiable evidence. With every bit of information, every single line of text I read of this news article, I became more and more disturbed. I shook hands with a monster based on his victims. I myself was never in real danger. I was male, very fit, and if I would have been apprehended, a lot of people would have been looking for me. But just thinking about what kind of person I had these friendly talks with in front of this house, and at this time there actually was this woman being tortured, shackled up in the upper floor or the basement while I was having these short chats with him. And I had no idea and did not, or better said, could not help. This still makes me anxious when I think back. Willie, or Wilfried as his full name is, was sentenced to 11 years, his wife to 13. Willie actually had an IQ of 59, which meant by German law he was considered insane and thus not criminally liable. He was placed in a psychiatric ward for criminally insane. His wife got 13 years because she actually testified and confessed to everything. Prosecution was demanding life sentences without parole for both, and based on what I read about the torture and the actual planning that went into it with the faked suicide notes and stuff, I myself do not really buy the part of insanity. I would want this monster to be locked up for good, the total opposite of what I would have actually wished him if we would have met this one time again back then. But then again, if I would actually had knocked on the door, maybe he would have opened, and just maybe, I could have heard the tortured women screaming for help or trying to get my attention and just done something. I might have been able to stop this monster and save a life. Or maybe I have been lucky for not doing it.